Hi, marketers. This is Dots, and welcome to the Marketing Leadership Podcast. With me here is Geoffrey Colon, Senior Director of Digital Marketing at Dell Technologies, and he is the founder and creative director at Creative Studies. We will discuss the marketing media innovation, where creative meets revenue. I know you guys are ready, so let's get it. Geoffrey, you're welcome. How are you doing?
Good, Dots. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. So I can't wait to hear this, Geoffrey. Do you want to please tell us about yourself, your background, and your role?
Sure. I've been in the field of marketing for some time now. Digital marketing, probably in the last 30 years. Early to the
Wow.
web in the early 90s when still an undergrad. Have done a little bit of everything. Worked for small agencies, worked for large agencies, and then have worked on the brand side, specifically at Microsoft and now at Dell.
Yeah, it's I would say, looking at your career, and if you're listening, please check out Geoffrey Colon on LinkedIn, and he will be giving his contact details later. But what are some of the top three career lessons for marketers, that wants to build, a great enterprise exposure like you have? What are some of, like, it doesn't have to be three, and it could be more than three, whatever you think. But yeah, we're listening.
Yeah, I think the most important one is to what no matter where you are in your career, let's say you're new to marketing or you've done other things. Let's say you're older, but you're taking on more of a marketing responsibility or trying to learn more, is try and find something you enjoy marketing that you can learn sort of the ins and outs of it. That's sort of how I got involved in it. I think when we're given things we're not so much into, we have a
Yeah.
tendency of not really learning, the ins and outs of those things. So,
Yeah.
my early marketing was around, things like music and live events. It just was really nice to be able to figure out who's the audience. That's always a question we ask. What
Yeah.
does success look like? What are we trying to do? That then helps you, I think, get to the next stage where when you are doing things where you're like, I'm not necessarily a subject matter expert, but I'm more of a generalist. You at least know the steps that you have to take to do really interesting, marketing. I think a lot of times marketers run into, let me just sort of take something, any role and do what's necessary. And they don't really understand the audience or like the motivations of what those people are, what they're trying to learn.
Yeah, that makes sense. And we'll get into that in a second in terms of understanding the people we are trying to communicate to. So, and speaking of your experience, I would like to start with how you've led digital, or not just digital, global marketing teams, and look at really how you approach the global marketing strategy. So, how does a global strategy differ from a multi-domestic marketing strategy? And what do I mean by multi-domestic? Whether you might be targeting maybe different regions within a country or similar countries within a region, um, basically at a smaller scale. How do you compare a global approach to a much more regional approach when it comes to marketing strategies?
Yeah, this is a good one because we have to realize like most brands, if they're global by nature, and almost any brand who's on the internet is global by design because they're available to
Yeah,
anyone.
yeah,
You have to think of what is the sort of the 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 function of what that brand does. What does it help people do? So,
yeah,
at the higher level, at the global level, you're really thinking of, what's the value proposition? Why do people use our brand? What makes us a no-brainer? When you think about it, Dots, like no-brainer really is why brands exist, because in your
true.
subconscious, you want to
Yeah,
be able to be a company or a brand that people say, oh, yeah, if this brand's a good brand for whatever usage it might be. And that
yeah,
becomes the default.
yeah,
Um, so, at a global level, you're really trying to think of those higher end things. Then you want to give that to regional teams who may understand things more at the ground level on, okay, we understand the value proposition, we understand our products, we understand our solutions. Now we're going to um, translate that so it makes sense to people in their region, their country, their area. But you should always, good brands usually you're leading with that larger story, and then
Yeah,
um, regions can interpret that, make it ownable for them. But
yeah,
it always leads back to, what does a brand provide? What value does it provide? I think we've gotten away from that maybe the last decade or so. Everyone was trying to figure out, like, okay, hey, let's do these things. And and it would go off on a tangent of storytelling that maybe didn't make sense. At the end of the day, you just
yeah,
want to ask, what how do you help people do their job, or how do you help them solve a problem, or
yeah.
what does your brand provide that they can't get from anybody else?
Yeah, I a lot of nice points there, and I'm going to start with what you mentioned about trying to communicate the job to be done. You mentioned the word job there. Ever since I heard that, I stopped talking about customer needs. I thought, saying the job to be done sounds more cool because marketers always like to be the cool magicians. But something else I've also, love you saying there is how you have that overall vision, the no-brainer of the brand, and then having the regional. And just to clarify here, listeners, regional means countrywide, country managers, as
Correct.
some might call them. Yeah. So having those then personalize that based on the nuances of the environment that they are dealing with. And I would like to extend that question a little bit, Geoffrey. What is your expectation from these regional or country managers in terms of how they take that message and then personalize it, whether it's based on culture or lifestyle? Are there specific things that you expect from them when it comes to innovative storytelling, and what are those, if you would like to share?
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that a brand provides is, you have a visual identity that's defined at a global level. That's not
Mm,
going to change region by region in terms
mm,
of, your color schemes and things like that.
mm,
The tone of voice there, you sort of set that at the global level as well. Um, there's a number of things, though, that when you take that from a global level and then you bring that to a regional level, that's when it makes sense for those managers to say, okay, hey, we're gonna take everything that you've given us. We're only gonna tinker or change a few things because, again, to your point, it's gonna fit that particular market. But this is also the job of global brand managers to really understand, hey, the stories that we tell, or how we position our brand,
yeah,
does that make sense in every territory where this is going to go to? I can't tell you how many stories, used to exist where we would we would say, this is what we're going to do for the year for the brand around the world, and regions would rebel by saying that's absolutely irrelevant for our market, because you'd have a
yeah,
person trying to be a little bit too gimmicky, or gimmicky, so to speak, with what was going on, that it didn't really adapt to all. So the job for a regional manager shouldn't be to recreate all these stories. It should be to
mm,
translate them and make them make sense for their regional audience, with cultural nuance, changing things that make sense, based on those territories. So that's when we think about it, it's almost like writing a book. the
yeah,
reason books the reason books become bestsellers is because they're translated into multiple languages, but the subject matter is relevant to all of the end readers. They're like, wow, this is a great book, I love
yeah,
reading it.
yeah, yeah.
Brand managers have to think that way. How are we going to write something? And of course there's a lot of complexity here, but that
Mm.
really works around the world. no matter what
Yeah.
language it's in.
Yeah. And I mean, this is probably not the episode for that, but you have to, have a sophisticated level of stakeholder management, because everyone has got their own perspective, and you have to agree to disagree, you have to align, you have to collaborate. There are so many of these back end things involved, but I like to stick to all the things you've said, which I would summarize in terms of having this shared vision, but at a local level. Basically. Another thing I would like to get from you when it comes to communicating globally is the media innovation involved. Again, we're talking about media marketing innovation and how creative meets revenue. And I would assume that you probably figured out some benefits to this in terms of cost effectiveness. Running global marketing campaigns that are cost effective, that are driving the right ROI. We are in an age of budget cuts, with the whole recession, no recession. So how do you do that? Like, how do you, I think you started with, managers not recreating stuff. Maybe you can dive deeper into how marketing innovation or creative innovation is being used these days to deliver efficient and cost-effective marketing.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's interesting is, people are working, with less budgets right now. I mean, that's just a given.
Yeah,
For those who happen to be like listening to this, I mean, if you think about it, what we should be doing is we should be thinking of like, how do we take what little amount of money we have and telling something that is, gains, quite a bit of attention out there, so that you are actually priming the market for when people are going to be in market, which probably isn't going to be now, it's going to be later. But
yeah,
that's what's
demand
always
gen.
exactly, that's what's always interesting is, usually you're not going to sell really a ton during an economic downturn. So that the belief system is, let's just not do any advertising, let's cut back on marketing. But then you sort of dry up all of your demand at a later date, because sure, people aren't in market right now, but they're seeing things that, when they are in market, that, that's really the function of marketing. You're priming markets. That's why it's hard to turn it off and turn it on.
Yeah,
Though I think, finance officers feel like, hey, you can shut that off and you can turn it on later and create ultimate demand, because they've been sold sort of this, fake bag of goods that, that's how humans work and how
work.
decisions are made. But that's not really
Yeah,
how it is. So, to answer your question, innovation right now should be used to just, gather as much attention and fame as possible. So when people are ready to make a decision, they are again thinking of you first in that no-brainer capacity, whether you're selling, cloud computing solutions or a new diet drink, you're top of mind.
yeah. That makes sense, and I like that perspective as well. I think if you're listening right now and you're on the marketing leadership side, then you need to know that always on is back. Let's put it that way. The forgotten stone of brand awareness and product awareness, especially in B2B, is back. And we need to continue to do that to create top of mind awareness. The kind that generates sales qualified leads, because I know that's what everyone is gunning for these days.
Yeah.
So, looking into the innovation side of things, I like to always talk about strategy, because, of course, you cannot develop strategy. You cannot have innovation without strategy in anything, including creative strategy. So what's your playbook typically? And you can feel free to spend some time on this or give us something on a high level, but what's your playbook in terms of elements of an innovative creative strategy? The one that considers all the variables, whether it's channels, consumer journeys, tone of voice, you mentioned that earlier, and whatever makes the new marketing mix these days. What are some of those ingredients, if we use that analogy?
Yeah, lately I've been sort of going back to what most models have looked like the past, 20 years or even 10 years ago. I think we revert to things that we know ultimately work. There's usually
Mm,
flashes of oh, this is where new thing is. You see that constantly, Dots, in terms of marketing. It's like, this is the new way, but
mm,
most of it's just really, those are new practices. The principles still remain the same, probably have been for
mm,
thousands of years. So
yeah,
when we add digital in, I mean, one of the most important things is that most companies have an owned and operated property. They have a website that they have full control over what goes on that website, the creative, the storytelling, the assets, the customer journey that they want to create through a good user experience, you name it. They have full control of that. But what we
yeah,
do is we tend to say, oh, all the power is over on these external channels where you have no algorithmic control whatsoever. You have no control over what happens with a LinkedIn news feed, a TikTok feed, an Instagram feed. You have no control over a billboard you may put up in terms of what other billboards go around it over time. You have no
yeah,
control over what goes on, if people see certain advertising that happens on connected television, because they might be
yeah,
like, yeah, I got up and I did something else while that ad that I can't fast forward through anymore with, streaming television now plays. So there's a number of factors there, but one factor that we do have is if you are pulling people to an owned and operated property,
mm,
when they show up, you have the most control over that. And yet I see company after company, they don't seem to care about that at all. It's like you
yeah,
get there and it's like, hey, how do I find anything? I mean, it's quite interesting because I think this is an area that most companies have just put on the back burner
mm,
because we've bought into the shiny bright object syndrome of what happens, oh, we're going to use all these external, channels and
paid
and
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 earned
pull.
media.
There you go. And so I'm not cutting on that as an importance. It's important to generate demand and also to reach mass audiences. I'm definitely not anti-advertising. There's a lot of marketers that are like, oh, we don't need that. No, Tesla doesn't use that. Of course, they don't seem to understand that. Elon
They've
Musk is one of
started anyway,
that's
so
right. And then also Elon Musk is one of the best marketers in the world because he knows
yeah,
exactly what he's doing.
yeah,
So it's just interesting that we just don't put a lot of emphasis though on owned properties. I think that's where things are going again because this happens during economic downturns. Wait a minute, what do we have most control over? This is what we're going to focus on. And of course,
yeah,
getting traffic there is important. That's not going to go away, but you want to retain that. That's the function of what marketers are trying to do in this day and age that we've gotten away from, which is how do you retain people's interests? How do you retain their interest in you being possibly the solution that they buy? How do you retain their attention? We've given that up for, hey, look, I did a post, it got 100,000 views. Yeah, that's ephemeral. That's gone in 24 hours. How are you
yeah,
creating a sustaining story? You're going to hear that a lot. But we have gone from disruptive marketing, which I wrote a whole book on, to really like, how do you create sustainable marketing? That's, if you can do that, Dots, you will be totally fine in this environment, no matter how it ebbs or flows.
yeah. I like the things you said. I like what you said about the obsession over statistics. Some people, what they also do now, especially like in the video cycle, is, oh, this guy used this thumbnail, or he spoke in this way and he got 1 million views. I'm going to do exactly the same.
Yes.
Mr. Beast is probably a scapegoat in terms of plagiarism of ideas and stuff like that, and all these very tactical first approaches to content marketing.
Yes.
Was something else you said, which I also like, is that, again, maybe it's just drumming the demand gen drum here, but you need to sustain. You need to sustain the demand. When people think of the job that needs to be done for your product or your brand, they need to think
Yep.
about you first, and not
Yes.
just at the awareness stage, but it's at the awareness stage, at the consideration, at the decision, and then when you are
Yes.
breeding advocates, somebody calls it the pump and funnel strategy. You have customers becoming advocates and creating even more demand for you. So it's important, if you are listening now, to note those elements. It's very easy in the creative world to run very far and fast. And I'm going to, my next question to Geoffrey is going to reflect on that. But let's be aware of some of these things. Know that we are speaking to customers, not numbers.
That's right.
It's a human to human communication at this time. And yes, 2023 has been explosive. You know, um, some people will say, what a great time to be alive, with generative AI and stuff. Yeah, but I'm not gonna come here and say don't fall, don't be up, don't be obsessed with everything online. Yeah, there's a bit of obsession, but when it becomes too much, then you're sort of, again, starting with tactics before strategy.
Yes.
But I also think, that there is some use to everything going on around us. And there is some use to this specific subject you're talking about, especially for brand designers. So, is there anything you've seen? Is there any approach that you would recommend in terms of like generative AI or generative SaaS, and how not just creative designers, but even marketing leaders can see or look at, in terms of judging their own expectations from their subordinates?
Yeah, I'm not anti-generative AI. I think if you think of how it's being used, you can use it
Mm,
for mood boarding, you can use it for storyboarding, you can use it for a lot of things. You can use it for copy. I think a combination of people using these tools, just like how you would use, Microsoft Office, humans still need to, run the software is really
yep.
how things are sort of going to move here. But
Okay.
it'll allow for a lot of things, I think, to move a little bit, faster to from the iteration phase to the execution phase. So, for example, if you are putting together a bunch of creative that's going to go out into the social media ecosystem, what
Yeah.
what may have taken, let's say 6 to 9 months at most organizations, working with an agency, doing other things, testing, et cetera, might now be able to be done in a fraction of a time, because the
Mm,
testing can happen now through generative AI. You can figure out what the best sort of creative is. You can deploy it, and you're sort of done there. The where humans play a huge part is, what are the actual ideas that we're going to come up with in the first place? And this
okay.
actually comes from years of talking with AI scientists at Microsoft. They're like, AI is not good at original ideas. That's not what it's there for. Humans are good at what those ideas are. What imaginary ideas are we going to actually put into place? And then
Yeah.
you're using generative AI to actually, make that happen at a faster pace. What's interesting here is most big companies are set up to run risk averse models. So where I sense there's going to be an issue over the next, 2 years, is you're going to have a number of companies that will say, let's tread cautiously here. Let's not really look at how we adopt this, and let's just move slow. I saw this with social media adoption back in the late 2000s. I saw
Mm,
this with web adoption in the late 1990s. It was always like, let's tread cautiously. And in each one of those cases, companies were slightly left behind in the
mhm,
marketing area, but then they were able to recuperate and catch up, because they were like, okay,
mm,
hey, we didn't get on the web, but neither did our competitors. So we will just basically now be able to build a website and we'll be fine. In
mm,
this area, I sense it's not your competitors who will outrun you. It'll be smaller players who have absolutely nothing to lose. And that is the
Mm,
case because you are in an economic environment where smaller players have less budget to use. And so they'll be like, we don't, we don't have, we don't have all the risk averseness or obstacles that big orgs have. So I think
yeah,
the interesting thing in this entire debate around marketing is, who is actually talking about it. The most excited companies seem to be the smaller ones. The ones that
yeah,
tread cautiously are the big ones. And of course, there's reason why. I think they feel like they're going to be obliterated here.
yeah,
And they might be. We may see some of the most interesting marketing out there in the next 5 years as a result of these tools, and how people basically use them, manipulate them to create interesting forms of creative.
yeah. Wow, wow, wow. That's true, and that's interesting to see. Um, I will say this, and with everything in life, with society, we tend to overfix everything. So it's hard to find the balance. Oh, let's use AI. Okay, everybody goes to the extreme and forget everything else. Now, let's be risk averse about AI. I agree with you. I've worked with
Yeah,
some companies who are very risk averse, just like that, and they are very careful. They nearly shy away completely. And then when companies like Domino's Pizza are doing great with creatives, and you can order a pizza by just posting an emoji of the pizza, they'll be like, oh my, that's great. Okay, let's dump the conservation and overfix the adoption one more time.
that's
It's
right.
always hard to find the balance. I know marketing and branding is about creating perception with your audience. So there's a lot of emotional engagement involved with customers. But I think leaders should know better. I'm talking about marketing leaders now, or future marketing leaders. So if you're listening right now, you should know better in the sense of, using this technology. Mood boarding is an example I didn't even think about before. Always use that as an enabler to enable your strategy. But adoption is something that we should also consider. Uh, not too much of everything. Everything is permissible, only in moderation, as they say.
Yeah.
So I would like to check back on you with regards to another question here. Many marketers, I believe, they don't have too much faith in the organic media traffic vertical, and which is growing to be a big mistake these days, because there's a lot of that, paid media paralysis, or whatever, we see that as. And you've mentioned a bit about digital transformation for owned media experiences as well. I think that's sort of where this plays into. But what are some of the other innovative solutions today that makes you feel like organic media traffic is something people should leverage more, and that will give them better results in terms of, creative or brand meet revenue? What are some of the things that you've seen from your experience?
I mean, I think one of the things is now you don't have to go and hire, someone who's worked on like movie studio quality to create that. You can
Yeah,
find that through sort of like creator channels. There's a lot that are really talented. I don't think we really utilize enough of those people out there. I would love to see
yeah,
more companies say, hey, we've hired a creator instead of this agency to basically come up with what these new marketing assets might be, because the
mhm,
brand has actually sort of sat down and said, hey, this is the story we want to tell, this is what the strategy is going to be. But instead of doing the usual, let's hire a creative agency, they're like, let's just go hire a creator to sort of bring this to life, and
mm,
not treat it like a PR moment, but really treat it like,
mm,
hey, we actually found a person who is the amplifier of this information as well as the creator of this information. I mean,
mm,
we're at a point now, Dots, where individuals, and I haven't seen this in a while, maybe ever, but individuals have maybe just as much influence or influential power as a brand
that's
has.
true. That's true.
And, the fact that people can generate, lots of revenue, that was only possible for major brands less than like 10 years ago. So that shows the structural change we are witnessing right now, The power dynamic is basically shifting from like institutions to individuals because of the web. Now that can ebb and flow again, depending on what's going, what's happening, but
Yeah.
that's definitely the case, right now of where things exist. I don't see enough of that being used in creative elements. I myself have been hired as a creator by brands who dictated to me what they wanted rather than saying, you're the creator and sort of understand this. We want to tap into your network, your
Yeah.
zeitgeist. They don't, a lot of brands are run by people who absolutely have no clue what they're doing. I will go on the record of saying that, because they don't have any functional expertise. They don't do any of this stuff for a living. They don't have any skin in the game. That's the thing that creators have actually done, is they have skin in the game. This is their sort of livelihood. And I think we need to listen to some of those people a little bit more, because there's a tendency of, okay, this is what we want our brand to do. It's got to do this, but it doesn't really think about, hey, have you asked, or do you understand what audiences are seeking? I still don't see enough of that in the brand world, especially the brand marketing world.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I think it's because when it comes to brands, sometimes things are very how do I put it? They are very high level. They are very soft. It's about the
Yes.
emotion. You can't quantify
Yes.
it. We just have to find the fix. And now that we are beginning to consider brand awareness again, I fear that people are about to get into that mistake again. Remember what I said about humans and extremes? So, but I would suggest, and for those listening, I'm sure that Geoffrey agrees with me here, that first you need to know what you're doing. You need to have a good idea of what others are doing. That way you can see perspectives and you don't stifle creativity. But what's also important is that you need to always combine, and we'll get to that in a second here. You need to always combine creativity with data. You need to, with innovation, you need to combine authenticity with innovation, with data, with insight, with research. So that way you're really, hitting the nail on the head as much as possible, and serving this communication even as efficient as possible. So it's important to have like a good mix of both. I would say sometimes leadership try to provide some commercial context as to what creatives should try to achieve, but you need to allow the creative to leverage the power of innovation to make that goal come to life. Instead of, everybody's talking about the Barbie campaign nowadays, and my guess is everybody's trying to do a Barbie spin-off, maybe a Barbie marketing leadership podcast. But we need to be very careful of things like that. It's always we are just chasing something instead of us setting the trend or getting ahead of the curve. But enough of my rant there. I would like us, before I let you go, get into some of the technicalities and the best practices of marketing innovation. There is a subject that I've always loved, and I'm sure you know a lot about: dynamic ad creative optimization. Or we can just take our ad away from there and say dynamic creative optimization, because there are some times that you do dynamic insertions and ads are not really involved. How personal can we get with that tactic? For many of us here who are performance marketers and have to work with a lot of creatives, how personal can we get with that, in terms of, okay, here is a piece of the brand, but it's being pushed in different ways to different areas of the audience, different aspects of the audience's share of life, and also trying to split test what tone of voice works best. How personal, or let me add this word, how complicated can it get when it comes to getting really personalized with this type of technology, the dynamic creative optimization?
Yeah, I think one of the things we have to think about is most of that is created through signals. Personalized
Okay. Yeah.
advertising
Yeah.
works
Yeah.
because of signals. You're on a certain
Yeah.
area of a site, you're looking for, let's say, shoes. Most of that is just retargeted ads with simple creative, like, oh, do you want to buy this? Where I think things could be headed, it's not there yet, Dots, but it could be headed because of generative AI, is the ability to generate a number of real personalized ads based on, not just your browsing history, but also your prompt history, what you're asking search engines. And that is not also going to take that won't look like a banner ad per se. That really may look more like, text messaging with like animated GIFs or other creative in it. We're really moving more toward, that area. When we think of personalization, there's a tendency, and I used to disagree a lot with how Microsoft sort of approached this, where they would say, oh, we're going to do personalized ads and here's how it will show up on the web. And it's like, wait a minute, you're talking about something personal, but then it's like in an area that's more open, like on a web page. Personal is going to work best within personal channels. That's why personal ads or personal messaging will work best within sort of messaging apps or SMS. At least that's my belief. And that actually is an area that marketers also, do have control over. They shouldn't cede that control over to like, oh, that's the IT team handles that because it deals with like marketing automation. If you go to most organizations, Dots, that's who controls those things. And it's like, wait a minute, marketing should control that because that content is going to be quite dynamic. It is going to sound more personal. It's going to sound unique. It's going to have a tone of voice that the person on the other end can relate to. That's what marketers are good at doing. And that is that intersection of creative and performance that you just spoke about. So, dividing those is silly because in the next couple of years, that's going to all fuse together because of most of the generative AI tools that we have. So we may as well get ready for that now and try to combine more of that in our practice.
Yeah. And how do you think that would scale with a global marketing strategy? So take all you've just said right now, and how do you think that is going to scale from a global marketing strategy perspective, in terms of having this consistent brand, but at the same time, personalized experiences, whether it's by culture or what have you, but also the authenticity part of it. I think being authentic, we just have to be as authentic as possible in today's world. Sometimes being cynical is part of it. Again, being extreme. A lot of people use that a lot these days. But maybe if it works, well, and if it's true, well. So what do you think, if we are trying to use that strategy at the global stage and mixing, creative with innovation?
Yeah, I mean, I think brands will still matter. There's a tendency of some people to think like they won't matter in this sort of upcoming era that we're moving to. I think brands have always evolved. They've been around for, quite some period of time, ever since, that you've had the ability of like the printing press. That's really sort of, I think, where the first scalable brands happened. But like we've gone through like the printing press, radio, and film and TV, to the internet, to like basically mobile devices. Brands have ebbed and flowed with all of that. I think we may see just less brand advertising as we knew it, and more brand awareness continuing to happen. But on the personal side, it will really come down to, hey, Dots, we know that you're looking for this, or what questions you have on this, because it sort of knows your intent, and it really acts as an intelligent assistant to try to help you, nudge you in a direction that you want to go in. But that will sound a lot more personable. The whole download now, buy now, dude, that's gone. That doesn't sound human. I know it works for some people and they talk about it, but that will be gone in this era where it's much more conversational.
Is that what I know you've been at the forefront of creative transformation when it comes to marketing, but is that what you mean where you said in the future, unique selling proposition becomes point of view and transaction becomes conversation? There are some other transformational things you said there, but I've been stalking you, Geoffrey. But the two things I love there is, the transformation of unique selling proposition to point of view, or transactional messaging, like download now or buy now to conversational messaging to
Yeah.
say, would you like to make that action a context? Basically, would you like to learn why this is this, even though we are telling them to buy? So
Yep.
do you want to elaborate on that? Because I like that concept of the brand shift with this
Yeah.
innovation we are talking about.
That's exactly what I mean, because if you think about it, the web has shifted over the last 30 years, like the ability to do certain things and our behavior, just like any other form of media shifts people's behavior.
Yeah.
What we're still doing, though, is we're still sort of using what I would call like Web 1.0 framework within this sort of new diagram. Like if you think about how, an old print advertisement would work, a lot of them would be like, you can purchase here. Of course, then you'd have to go figure out like, okay, I got to go to a physical establishment and do that. All we've gotten with buy now is like just an extension of that, but that's very transactional by nature. And it sort of assumes that people, when they see something, they just want to buy it. I don't know where that philosophy came from, but it's terrible in terms of why we adopted it, because that's not how humans really behave whatsoever. But I just don't think we have the technology for it. Now we do, and we can basically become much more, conversational in nature, which is really what most of us use the web for, is like, oh, hey, I'm going to have, there's a way for me to comment here, or a way for me to ask questions, or a way for me to figure things out. Like, we do that in the real world and we do that online. That's the thing that's also missing too, is most of how we behave online is a reflection of how we behave in physical spaces. That divide is silly. So I think the best digital marketers are actually those who understand the intent of what people like to do. They've been around people in physical spaces where they can figure out this is what motivates them. That's important. I think a lot of times we think like digital is just like an infrastructure that you behave, and you behave very different from how you behave in the real world. Whereas those who sort of worked on the initial web were like, this is supposed to mimic what we do in real life, except we're doing it in a digital space. And advertising, I think maybe, has caught up to the fact that that's a truth.
Yeah. I think it's all based on, again, also from the mindset of direct response. That has, for the past, say, 5-6 years, going into performance marketing, that's all I knew. Like, it's all about direct response. And now slowly changing my mindset into how demand gen works, how we should approach the job to be done. Imagining a button on a website reflecting your job to be done. Basically, do you want to do this, to which helps you to move from one stage of that funnel or flywheel into the other. So it's all interesting, everything going on. But the only thing I would say, if you're listening here, is that it's not easy work. Even if we are going to get a lot of help from technology, I think getting it right still needs human intervention, and that is not easy. Automation sometimes, or systematization sometimes, breeds complacency. Please, let's not all be complacent about this, and let's keep being the magicians that we are. Innovation help us all.
Yep.
Yeah. I've enjoyed this conversation, Geoffrey. Like, I like the way you see the future going forward, and how people should, whether it's global or local, look at marketing innovation, look at the way content is being created and served, and how that can all still tie into revenue. So thank you so much for that. And I would like you to please share details on where people can find you. I know millions of people can find you already, but where can we find you? If you've got like platforms, or if you've got like a forum or for podcasts or things like that, like our listeners to also join as well.
Yeah. Probably the most active place is on LinkedIn. That's where you can find me. So just do a search for, Geoffrey with a G, the last name Colon, Colon. And then I used to be active on lots of other platforms, but if people want to, connect with me if they have questions. I have a good old fashioned website, geoffreycolon.net.
.net. Yeah, that's so good. So please follow and learn more on this very unique but extremely useful aspect of marketing. Thank you all guys for listening. That's all we have for today. Please see more episodes at dotslovesmarketing.com. Subscribe to the Marketing Leadership Podcast on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. And with that, I'll see you next time and connect the dots.
Thank you for listening to the Marketing Leadership Podcast, brought to you by Listen Network. There will be links to resources mentioned in today's show notes. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a 5-star review and be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode.